called Soro Soke, The Young Disruptors of an African Megacity, was published by Trish Lawrence, who's, as you can guess from the name, a non-Nigerian researcher. So the outrage was that Lawrence had been quoted as saying she coined the Yoruba term Soro Soke for speak up. Now that anger bubbled into something else online and offline. The outrage was that the story of a generation was being told by a foreigner, by an outsider. It wasn't just online with 7,500 signatures petitioning for cancellation of the book. It actually resulted in the real-time cancellation of Lawrence's book launch. And so we had Twitter spaces and general discussions. Who is supposed to tell this type of story? Now, bear in mind, we're asking the panelists here different versions of this question, but would also like to hear from you when the time comes. Who is an outsider? Who is an insider? Are they allowed to tell the story? And so for me, I think the main reaction that has brought us here was the reaction to Lawrence's book. And it was that anyone based outside of Africa, physically, or in racial terms, in Lawrence's case, should not be telling the African story. So we're going to go straight into it. Dear panelists, starting with Delma, what is your reaction to this reaction that Africans, only Africans physically based in Africa should tell the story?
So quite frankly, I believe that storytelling is a universal gift that we all have, and that we should be able to tell stories regardless of where we are from or what the color of our skin is. However, I understand the anger that led to this. However, how do we do this in a way that takes into account the authenticity of our version of the story? And so the anger is very much understood. However, if I'm being totally honest, I believe that stories should be told by everyone. However, the authenticity of the source and giving the credits. For example, she's saying she coined Soro Soke. That's bewildering. Soro Soke is...
You said it.
I mean, that's a cardinal sin. You can't do that. So, yes, let's all tell stories, but know what is the authentic source and how do we make sure that the source of these stories are given the due credits they deserve.
I remember when we were chatting earlier, you had an example, which I thought was quite spectacular. Right. Yeah, just go on, just tell us. What's your example of an outsider telling a story?
Okay, so I can really relate to an outsider telling a story because I'm from a small city called Jos. We are known to be deeply, highly creative people when it comes to the arts. However, I have had to leave Jos to come to Lagos to build my career. And I'm going to be honest to say that the kind of responses I get and the kind of comments I get abroad were the exact comments I was getting here in Lagos 15 years ago. So it's like, do you have Wi-Fi in Jos? It's like, so do you have to cover your hair to go to school? And these are people who are in the same country. So if we as humans who come from the exact same geographical location cannot understand each other enough to even know that, look, we definitely do have Wi-Fi in Jos. If you have Wi-Fi in Lagos, then we can't say that, the people who are doing it to us outside of the country are necessarily any different from us. That said, the biggest reason why I am all for the democratization of storytelling is this. So my tribe is a very tiny little tribe called Ngas. Anyone ever heard of Ngas?
Anyone? Woo!
Oh my God, we're
not
famous.
so tiny then.
Not so tiny after all. Okay, so the Ngas, we probably are between 6 to 7 million, and think of it, in a country of 208 million, we are like 6 to 8. We're not even sure, we're probably like 5. Anyway, I set out to...
Can I just point out that's bigger than the population of Scotland by nearly double. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not a tribe, it's a nation.
Okay. Oh my God.
Use your mic.
Okay, so I should be giving my tribe a high five right now. Nelson, thank you for that.
it.
It's not a tribe, it's a nation.
We are a nation. Well, my nation does not have a language dictionary, does not have any stories written about it anywhere in the world. So I'm doing this research, and my dad is like, oh, you people don't speak the language. I'm like, you didn't teach me. So this is me, old as 32, trying to learn to speak my language, and I'm like, what if something were to pop up on Google? I go check it, and guess what? The only compendium of my language, its dictionary, our grammar, whatever, was written by a German linguist called Hermann Rudolf Greit-Meyer.
Maya, is that our, I'm claiming
Yes,
him.
you know,
He's
yeah,
in our family.
Your
Yeah.
in-law.
He must be
Yeah.
my in-law.
So
Definitely.
written by Rona's very own in-law.
Yes.
And it turns out this guy was this really famous German linguist who came to Nigeria in the early 80s and spent some time at University of Maiduguri. That book is so rare and so uncommon, it costs close to $200 to buy it on Amazon. And so the point I make is if Rudolf Greit-Meyer did not write that book, we will currently not have a single compendium of my language. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other people who are linguists who are currently working on that, but we are so small, well, not small anymore, but we used to be so, I'm in a country where you have Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo as the major languages. You never ever get any sort of attention to the smaller languages.
Thank you.
So,
go on. Were you?
Yeah. So I say this to say, basically, we have to allow for the democratization of storytelling so that we can have different people contribute to whatever narratives have been developed. That said, I still go back to my point on authenticity. If you tell a story about me, please make the effort to tell it truthfully and be it whatever difficulties you have to go through to get to the core of the truth, please do, so that when you do tell my story, you don't represent Nairobi as Lagos as they do in the Marvel movies. Thank
Ouch.
you.
I heard the collective ouch. Tim, I want to come to you. What's your reaction to this reaction of outsider, race, blah, blah, blah? Because you have a unique position, so go for it.
I think the main thing to recognize is, regardless of whether the reaction is correct or appropriate, is it's understandable for reasons which are not immediately obvious, right? So if you look at based on the narrative as you just summarized it, right? We have this researcher who maybe did a slightly sloppy job, didn't spend enough time, didn't talk to enough people, bizarrely claimed to have invented a Yoruba phrase, and yeah, but then we very quickly move from that to foreigners should not be writing about Africa. Africans should be writing about Africa. You write about your thing and we'll write about ours. Now that is a big jump. So the fact that it's such a big jump tells us something immediately, that there is more to this than just this one person. There is history here, and there is it's as if it's like a release valve, a lightning rod for all the frustrations of Africans, of generations of being misrepresented
Okay, so
in the
you
Western
mean
media.
Sister Trish happened to be in the wrong book at the wrong time?
Or maybe doing it in the wrong way, but the point is that the anger it triggered is not just about that book. It's about the whole history, right? And the further you go back in the history, the uglier it gets, right? It starts with Benedictine monks in the 12th century drawing maps of Africa populated by monsters. Then you have the Portuguese sailors coming here, sending back dispatches that showed that actually, no, it's not populated by monsters, it's populated by human beings and other vertebrate species, just like every other continent. But, oh, they look different to us, and maybe there's something in that. And, oh, and then they come up with this idea, this very curious idea, that because they have very different superficial physical characteristics, that there must be something in that. Intelligence, character, even the way that their societies are organized must somehow be explained by these incredibly superficial physical characteristics. And so the idea of race is born. And it's a ridiculous idea, which presumably is why no one has thought of it before, but it sort of sticks, right? And we're stuck with it. And that is the legacy, and there's nothing we can really do about that except constantly subject it to scrutiny. And then you have Henry Morton Stanley, the first Western journalist in Africa, right? What a start, okay? We have this guy who basically, allegedly, goes down the Congo River. I mean, he was so full of fabrications, we don't even know whether any of this is actually true.
Exactly.
And he fills up his pages full of the same racist myths and preconceptions that Europeans are ready to listen to. Sends them back, and then just to put the icing on the cake, sets up King Leopold's claim to the Congo, which then sparks the scramble for Africa. That is not a good start, is it? Right?
It's not.
Okay.
On behalf of our ancestors, it's not.
So you might think I'm being facetious using these examples because they're so far in the past and things have changed a lot, but that is the question. How far have things changed? And we all know that Stanley set up a model that has been sort of repeated by some Western journalists in the continent. Yeah. The intrepid, the dashing, sun-tanned explorer going through braving the wilds of Africa to bring light, you know, to tell the stories, but basically ultimately filling up the pages because they didn't do enough research with their own preconceptions. So all this means is if you are a Western journalist writing about Africa, there is baggage. And there is no such thing as leaving that baggage behind. The baggage is coming with you whether you want it to or not. So you have two choices. You can either ignore it and pretend it isn't there, and then you're likely to trip over it. Sorry, I'm over-laboring this analogy, but you're likely to repeat the mistakes of the past. Or you subject it to scrutiny, and you start asking yourself, am I repeating these preconceptions? Have I really tried to understand what's going on here, or am I just projecting on it? Have I spent enough time to really figure out, and have I spoken to all the people I need to speak to? Have I claimed to have invented a Yoruba phrase? Sorry. And so I think that the point is that unless you ask yourself these questions, you are likely to subject yourself. And I have to admit, I haven't read the book, right? So I'm not going to comment on that.
No, you don't have to. We are actually talking about that sentiment, which, you capture admirably. If we look at it, Delmois says it should be democratized, and you, Tim, say we should actually be looking, if you're an outsider, you should be looking, acknowledging the baggage and respecting the history and seeing where the outrage comes from, understanding where the outrage comes from. Correct?
Correct, yeah.
Now, Nels. Hey. For you, I want to ask you what the reaction is, because you've had some of that reaction thrown at you.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that and what your reaction is to the reaction?
Sure. So I think there's so many things going on here. I'll just give a couple of anecdotes. In 2016, I was in a bookshop called Waterstones in a place called Tottenham Court Road, which is one of the major retail areas in London. And I went to the Africa section of Waterstones, and I just stood in front of all the books in front of there. And suddenly I'm just glancing my eye over every last book, and I noticed a common theme. Every book, barring two, were written by white men. The two that were not were written by Nelson Mandela.
I was about to ask.
And Chinua Achebe, who had just recently died at that point.
Old black men.
Yeah, older black men, distinguished black men at that too. The largest sources of information on Africa till this very day remains CNN and the BBC. If you go through pretty much anywhere in this world right now, if you want to learn anything that is deemed to be quality information or quality stories about Africa, it is persistently told through a European prism, which is often told to benefit that prism itself too. I agree with you, my sister, that on a normal basis, anybody should get to tell any story.
I sense a but.
However,
nice play.
However, there's a reason why I'm not invited to speak about Brexit, or I'm not invited to speak about the rise of Donald Trump, or I'm not invited to speak about the direction of interest rates in the United Kingdom, or I'm not invited to speak about the makeup of the Fed, or anything else. Or there's many different, so I'm somebody who I appear a lot on Western TV, predominantly British TV, but there's a set of subjects they're comfortable with me speaking on, and a set of subjects they're not comfortable with me speaking on, meaning that there is indeed a protection of who gets to tell what stories when it comes to European stories. When it comes to African stories or so, there is no protection whatsoever. In fact, there is a protection, But it's the same protection on the other stories side once again too.
I mean, wouldn't this also be the same thing happening? I'm remembering what Tim said.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be the same now in stories, as opposed to sharing of the land and protecting and colonizing? Isn't this the same thing happening here?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
There is protection, as you said, for the telling of European stories, but there's no such protection.
Exactly.
For
So if you take a look at it, as Tim so excellently pointed out, from time immemorial, and my sister also pointed that too, time immemorial, African stories have predominantly been told. African stories in the mainstream, even African stories, when you look at post-colonial Africa or so, the absolute demonization of post-colonial African leaders or so, from the good, actually the really decent ones, to the horrendous ones or so, they ran wild with it. In fact, the New York Times, and I read this in Martin Meredith's book, so I haven't read the actual New York Times. The New York Times actually apparently mentioned some sort of story about somebody being boiled in a pot during Ghana's 1957 independence, which of course was nonsense. And you hear all these stories about African leaders or so, and even when you take a look at certain things, for example, like what happened, so I wasn't a fan of Muammar Gaddafi in the slightest bit. It's like, he was Sani Abacha's best friend. Sani Abacha was a disaster to this country, but some of the stories that came out during the Libyan revolution, for example, were just straightforward propaganda coming from the West. Gaddafi gave his soldiers Viagra and all that sort of stuff, so it was just nonsense. But it's still, these things attain credibility with no questioning in terms of them too. But overarchingly, there is another side to this story too about the Soro Soke book. And I'll go to it really, really quickly. I mentioned it, anybody who's read anything about me probably know I can't shut up about it. But in 1992, I was sent to Nigeria to come to a boarding school. So I was born and raised in London, born and raised in Britain, also across Britain. But specifically, I was sent from London, where I was about 11 years old, to come to a boarding school in Nigeria. And I went to a boarding school in this place called the City of Abeokuta, which was the biggest fraud that was ever run on me in my life or so, because it was not much of a city when I got there. Maybe it was a city 5,000 years ago, but it wasn't one today. But what really happened to me was interesting was that I lived through the June 12 period. I was literally in the class. So Abiola went to my school. I was in the classroom when the riots broke out. I was dragged out of the classroom by mechanics and all sorts of bus conductors and all sorts of other people, and we were in the streets together shouting, Babangida Oli, Babangida Oli. I was literally a 13-year-old British kid when all this happened, in the middle of the street. So it was funny, when I got back home, my dad asked me how was this term at school, and I just had imagery of people picking up canisters of tear gas and throwing it back at the actual police and the soldiers and stones and everything else. But what was interesting to me, having lived through all of that, when this Soro Soke situation came up, I was invited, because I run an organization, I established an organization called the Black Writers Guild, I was invited to come and speak on the Twitter spaces.
Oh.
And one gentleman came up and said that, yeah, well, if you left this country about 20, 25, 30 years ago, so you have no business writing about it. So if you get a book deal on any time in Nigeria or anything else like that, you should give it to somebody who lives locally. And I thought to myself, how dare you? How dare you or so? But I get it at the same time too, because to that person, I am the exact same sort of usurper as the lady who wrote the book is, as the lady who usurped the Soro Soke slogan to write her book. And it does beg a question once again too, that yes, it is just and appropriate that Africans protect the authors, protect the right to tell their own stories. Mm-hmm. But I think at the same time too, we need to remain sensible as to who we are protecting it against and who is actually part of that story themselves too.
So it's about not just tarring everybody with the same racial brush, with the same geographical brush, and saying everybody who stays outside has no idea of what's going on inside, or saying everybody who's a different race has no idea and no experiences to lean on. That's a very great segue. No, stay with your mic, because I want to put you on.
I thought I was gone on too long.
I want to put you on the spot and quickly, so we'll have time for questions. You worked on your book, Think Like a White Man, with a very multicultural team, multiracial team. You need to buy the book. At the end, he compares all of them to rappers, so you need to get that. Instead of just saying thanks like a normal person, this guy actually compares everybody to rappers For that alone, you need to buy it. But for me, I think, how was it for everybody, insiders and outsiders, working on the production end of this book? Because in your book, you used the N word that rhymes with snigger 29 times.
It was only 29 times?
Yes, I
Oh,
counted
wow.
it. Thank you.
Disappointed.
You mentioned the foreskin on UK rapper Stormzy's penis one time, plus a host of other words you used. Now, what do you think gave you that license? Was it your race? Was it the genre, satire? And how was it for the other team? The other people in the team?
It's a very, very good point you make, actually, and I would like to apologize to Stormzy for mentioning this. Stormzy wasn't as big as he is now, really, truly, and I probably should have watched my mouth.
Oh, you thought you could get away with it?
My next book might be published by his label or something else like that. But I think so. Writing Think Like a White Man was a really, really unique experience, because my intention was set out to write the blackest book possible, something that was just too black for even Lagos, which is the blackest place on earth, by the way. It really is, actually. So I just really wanted to do that. But I think in terms of actually storytelling, I think it was important. Look, publishing in Britain is a predominantly white industry, and so in order for me to get the book out there, I had to pretty much tap dance a little here and there. But I just basically had to get the book out, and that was the important thing. But can I just say something really, really, really briefly?
Go ahead.
Just really, really briefly. And it's something that we're all here, we've all lived, pretty much everybody's been in this area for the last couple of days. If you made your way from the hotel where most of us are staying to here, you would have noticed something that may have become fairly normal to you pretty quickly. And it's the children selling stuff or begging in the streets. And it is, to me, something that this time around I've refused to let become normal in the story of Africa and who tells the story of Africa. Because those children over there, and I really don't want to get this wrong in the slightest bit. I want to make sure I get this precisely right, what I want to say. Normally, when we're telling the children the story of people of Africa, so it's normally people from the perspective of people like myself or about people like myself. And those are the stories that people like myself, black people like myself, or privileged people to a certain degree, or people with links to the outside world, and the pain, and therefore the empathy that we could feel is actually a little bit easier to attain. Those children that we all see and perhaps bought things for or gave a little bit of naira to are children who probably should be in school. And these are some of the most vulnerable people on the face of the planet. And making matters even worse, it's a ticking time bomb that if we don't tell their stories or so, we're going to find ourselves in very, very serious situations. I'll just wrap up by saying this. In 2018, my brother was kidnapped. And that started the launch of 6 of the worst days of our lives in terms of actually negotiating and getting him out. Last week, my best friend's cousin was kidnapped. That started 3 days of some of the worst days of their lives to get them out. And it's a very horrible process. We were lucky that we had access to somebody who was formerly in the British military intelligence process to help us negotiate to get them out. What we are seeing when we go by those children, if we don't find a way to create empathy for them and create solutions for them, is tomorrow's kidnappers, are tomorrow's bandits, are tomorrow's problems. So that's why I really want to emphasize that the Nigerian street kid, the boy and the girl who has nothing or so, are the people that we really need to shift our emphasis to on their stories and find a way to actually make sure they can profit out of their stories and gain some education from it and do better for the society tomorrow, or else people like us who enjoy these sorts of environments will be in a lot greater risk from them. And I'll shut up at that.
So you would like to see a shift in the blackness of the stories that are told?
I would like to see a shift in where we're placing the empathy of the stories, because it's really, because those are the people who I've never read a story. I've never read a story whatsoever about a Nigerian street kid. I've never seen anything.
Oh, then you should read Tim's book.
No, I haven't read Tim's book yet. But the Nigerian street kid, in my view, is pretty much the most, not just Nigerian street kid, the African street kid, the house girl, who is, again, a child laborer far too often or so, and often subject to the most vicious of abuse that you could possibly think of. These are the people whose stories we don't really get to hear enough of.
Very true.
And I feel that these are stories that need to get out, and we need to find a way for them to be able to tell their own stories and assist them to tell it, and create that empathy that stories, or that only telling stories can create.
That's really a moot point. And I will segue to you now. I wanted to go to Delma, but I don't want to lose this thread, Tim. So Tim has done some of that work that Nels eloquently put out there. Team, you've brought the stories of, I think, about 6 people who, these are Lagosians that, I mean, I moved to Lagos at 3, so I was basically born in Lagos. I speak, understand Yoruba. There are places that Team, an outsider by some standards, described, and I'd never seen that as a Lagosian. You know, there are people will read this book, Team, and there will be Lagosians that will meet people they have never been or will never be able to be. I mean, you have people who were, should I give spoilers? No.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
So you have people who joined street gangs. You have people who make a living off a whole waste economy. You have people who are land grabbers. You actually see the stories of the people behind the news stories that I consumed as a journalist and I consumed as a Nigerian. So Team takes us all the way there. Now my question for you is this: how was it to bring out those stories and bring out that empathy? Because before you knew it, I was sympathizing with a gangster bitch. I was like rooting for her to succeed. And that was empathy. How were you able to bring out these stories, bearing the fact that you are not a Lagosian in the actual term, and you had to sort of caution yourself? There was some of that acknowledgement that you speak of in your preface, where you said, you raised up your hand, metaphorically, and said, this is not my story to tell. That is why it is in the words of the people on the street. How was that experience for you?
Yeah, no, it was very important to me to that people sympathize and empathize with these characters, right? So, you know, I wanted to show Lagos in its raw entirety, its grittiness. And you know, we're focusing on the negative aspects. There was also a lot. You get the positive energy as well, the creativity, the vibe, the entrepreneurship.
You also get the mythology.
Yes, the mythology. Yeah. So that. But what I wanted to, because Nigerians rightly bristle at a lot of the outside perceptions of Nigeria, the corruption and it being so difficult, and the airport and the rest, and they feel like they're being dismissed without anyone really trying to understand why things operate the way they do, and why people put in this situation make the choices that they make. And so it was very important to me to try and show it from their perspective, which is why I had to sort of adopt the kind of the position of the omniscient, you know, Victorian narrator, knowing his every character's thoughts and whims. And obviously that's quite dangerous, because you can end up, you know, being a bit of a ventriloquizing, basically. You're sort
I didn't get that.
Okay, well, no, I tried not to. I think there was one criticism online where they said that I'd thought something that was outrageous, and I was actually presenting the character's thoughts. So the danger is definitely there. But the idea was to try and, you know, I realized for all the reasons we've just been talking about, right, it couldn't be about me, right? Because otherwise it's Henry Morton Stanley again, right, braving darkest Lagos. So it had to be based around these 6 characters and told from their perspective, not in the first person, because that really would be ventriloquizing, but in with me as the kind of third person narrator with a lot of access to their thoughts. And the only way of making sure I'd done it properly was just to go over it with them again and again and again. Is this what you felt? Is this what you thought? And, you know, suspending my disbelief when the supernatural comes into it, which is obviously a big part of the book. So yeah, that was it. And in terms of, like, you know, because I realized, right, my original question was trying to understand, how do people do it, right? I live a relatively, there's another reason it couldn't be about me. I was living a relatively comfortable existence in Ikoyi, right? I had a driver. I could sort of mitigate some of the things that make Lagos such a rough place. Yeah, exactly. But how do you, if you don't have that, how do you cope, basically? And it took me a while to realize that spirituality and belief in the supernatural, this idea that if I surrender myself to a higher power, that it could work in my favor, or at least enable me to cope with some of this anxiety that I have on a daily basis, that I can manage, basically. And so And so that's why it ended up being a kind of very spiritual book, a look at which of course opens up all kinds of minefields, right? As an outsider, but I waded through the field anyway.
Yeah, he was brave enough. I will tell you, I'm in for a treat, talking about the history of our religions and our gods, the pantheon of elders, and even the Zangbete of Badagry, that whole axis. So make sure you get a copy of both books. And Think Like a Man is actually called satire, but I think it's a career self-help book. Think Like a White Man. I think it's a career self-help book because you will exactly know how to cope in those types of environment. And if you're a rap head, also go for it. Delma, I'll come to you quickly before we do our audience questions. Please don't forget the questions are: who is an outsider, who's an insider, who do you think should be? And speaking of those words, Delmoa, you came from Jos. I don't know if you were here for MI's session with Nels as well.
I wasn't, I just flew in.
And he talked about the fact that he had to move from Jos. You know, Jos is this really stubborn, illegitimate child, in quote, when it comes to creativity in Nigeria. So as an outsider, you've spoken a bit about that. What was that like for you? Because now you're doing the thing, you're working with MTV, you're working with the UN. Like, how was it getting out there? And what would you like to tell any outsider?
So frankly, the early days were tough because Lagos really it is a melting pot of all of these cultures and all these people from all over the country. However, it does have that shield. So if you're not in that circle and you come in, there's a lot of suspicion. And if you're coming from the north of this country, there's an assumption of incompetence. So yeah, so if you're from the north, you're Omo Hausa, you can't possibly know anything and you can't possibly be good at the job. So it takes you just putting your head down, doing it, and then they're all like, oh, you don't act like you're from the north. So once you get anything done right, oh, you don't act like you're Hausa. I'm not Hausa. I have my tribe. It's Ngas. There are 350 languages in this country. I am one of those unspoken 347.
You tell them, girl.
So it was quite difficult, right? However, I find that after the first time I showed my CV, I never had to show my CV to anyone. So if you come into a new circle and you're the outsider, everyone wants someone who's going to get the job done so they can go to sleep. If they know that they can be sleeping and you're going to get it done and you're going to ace it, they will give you 10 billion opportunities. And for me, that's just really been the secret of breaking into that circle. But it also helps that my background, I mean, growing up, my dad worked in TV, and I was a TV star as a child. So, yeah.
Better get her autograph.
Get my autograph for the things that you never saw. Anyway, so I grew up on TV, and so that sort of put some degree of confidence in me, and my dad is that guy that tells you, you're the baddest, you can do it. It's like, come on, who are they? They don't know anything. Go, give it to them. So I came in, and I just always had my dad one phone call away. That really helped. But really, it's putting your head down, doing it so that they know they need you more than you need them. And as an outsider, you always have something to prove ultimately till the end. Now, I'm just here offering my best support to anyone who can, because I see what happens. I mean, I barely do social media. I get consistent messages from people like me in Jos saying, Del, I want to come and work for you. I want to work with you. Please help me. Please show me what you did. And I consistently try to hire people who are like myself, outsiders. So we work on a number of huge projects for some of the biggest VOD platforms.
Yes, Arewa Kudu, which tells the stories.
Right.
It's actually, I think it will be Chicken Shop Date, a version of Chicken Shop Date.
Right.
For people who are in the UK. But it's actually sitting down to a traditional northern male and getting interviewed.
Right.
And you literally sit down to the meal, and it's communal, and I'm going to leave everybody to find out from you. Right. And so one last thing, because we want to now take questions. In a sentence, who is an outsider? Who is an insider? Starting with you, Tim. One sentence.
I mean, it's, whether I'm an outsider or an insider.
Oh, no. Who? Define the term. Who is an outsider? Who is an insider for storytelling?
You know, it's very difficult. I think, well, the natural way to answer it is that you're an insider if you grew up in the culture and in the place. And if you're coming from outside, even if you spent a long time there, you're still really an outsider. So, you know, I married into a Nigerian family, and I feel like that's made me more of an insider. But I need to be very careful with this, because this can sound like, you know, those people who, white people who have a black spouse, and then they say, well, that means I can't possibly be a racist. And we all know that someone who says that probably is, because they haven't subjected, they think that they're exempt from having to subject their own unconscious prejudices to scrutiny. But at the same time, there's no question that my book was helped by understanding the family dynamics. I mean, you married to a Nigerian family, you are in a big Nigerian family. I mean, my number of siblings was increased by 15-fold. Okay, so and the drama, like, you know, like
you love the drama.
None of this passive-aggressive English, let's sweep our conflicts under the carpet, pretend they aren't there while we silently sit at the table and say pass the salt with murderous intent. No, it's none of that. It's like, it's there. The drama is there, right? And there's a reason why...
You love this drama. You know you do.
There's a reason why those Nollywood soap operas never run out of new ideas, okay? So
the shade!
Right, so did that help me understand? Because I've got 6 characters. Characters are a product primarily of their family background. Did that help me understand their family background? You bet it did, right? How much mileage can I get with that? I don't know, because of what I just said. You know, it's kind of, I don't want to overstate how much of an insider that makes me, but it certainly helped.
Good, so the word is marry outside of your culture. And we endorse, as people married outside of our culture, we endorse that message. Nels, your sentence?
I think it's, do you have skin in the game? Are you impacted by the outcome here, or have you just stumbled on a good story that can help you get paid? So for me, when it boils down to it, and I actually am looking at writing about Nigeria, quite literally, it's often life and death for so many of us that the world has to understand these stories. And I listened to Howard French. I listened to Howard French speak here yesterday. Spoken to Tim quite a bit, spoken to Covier, to so many people, so many brilliant people here, and learned so much from them. And I think increasingly, and you're seeing these amazing, brilliant thinkers with really, really great, profound ideas also about how we can move forward, not just as a country, as a continent, because I'm not too sure how much the concept of a Nigeria can actually can succeed, or how much of it has been actually shaped to fail on purpose. But long story cut short, I do think that skin in the game is the key decider. If you're somebody who just thinks, okay, well, let's just make a good story or so, get a little bit of an advance from the publisher, and off I go from there or so, you're an outsider, G, just go to hell. But if you're somebody who really and truly knows, when Tim's telling the stories of Nigerian street kids or so, Tim is actually saving that child. He's creating empathy that can save somebody's life or so, and can stop other people from going through the trauma of one thing or another, that the person with nothing to lose, who's the most dangerous person in society, is saving somebody from the trauma of becoming a victim of the person with nothing to lose by virtue of saving somebody from becoming a person with nothing to lose. Skin in the game makes you an insider.
And actually, a lot of it is about, again, like the empathy. Like, so that character you were speaking about, the female bus tout enforcer.
Shall we say her name? Toyin.
Toyin. She beats up bus drivers for money, right? For extortion, right?
She's an Agberu.
So, and in fact, when I presented the manuscript to my agent, he initially said, "You can't start with her. She's not a sympathetic character." I said, "No, she is. You just haven't read beyond the first few pages, because you see why she's like that. Her husband abandons her with 3 children. Yeah. She only knows these people in the bus park. She has no other chance of work. She's tough." And also the other thing is she because of her deep faith in she practices this Yoruba kind of Sufi Islam. She starts to become uncomfortable with the violence and starts to try and look for a way out of it.
Please don't give it all away. We gotta sell the book.
I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil it. But I thought I'd mention that, because that's also a counter narrative to the Western misconception. How many books are there about how Islam is making people do violent things? And this is an example of the exact opposite. It's because of her faith that she starts to say, I can't keep doing this. I need to try and find a way out. But I'm going to tell you what happens next.
And on that very reasonable note. Delma, please, quickly.
So I feel like I'm a convert now because, no,
Good.
I still stick to stories having to be, open to everyone telling. But something Nell says I think is strong, which is having skin in the game.
Yeah.
I honestly now totally agree with you that honestly, unless you have skin in the game, step away, right? That said, having skin in the game does not always mean you have to be married to someone or you have to live in that space or in that geographical location. It could be partnering, right? So if you're going to write a book, you feel like you're an outsider, find someone who you think it could be in the research. Yeah, it could be in the research, right? Work with the people who are part of that culture, part of that location, and I trust that ultimately we will be able to tell all of these stories because, quite frankly, I currently am telling a story that has zero to do with my culture, right? It's an Igbo story about the Aba Women's Riot, something that was a war but has been reduced to a skirmish in British history. And unless we tell these stories ourselves, if these women, that whole thing was the equivalent of the Arab Spring. It was the
Without
equivalent
Twitter,
of,
yes,
it was 10,000 women marching. It was the equivalent of, what's the New York one?
Black Lives Matter protests.
But exactly, it was that huge. But in history, it's been reduced to a skirmish, and that is the danger of that single narrative. And so, tell these stories. We will tell more. I'm not Igbo. I'm from the north. That's farthest from the east, right? But it's something we're passionate about, and we're working on it, and we're working with the people who know the culture and the history, and we're putting it out there. So partner up, research, get with the people who are the locals, and let's still democratize storytelling.
Thank you, guys. Have some skin in the game. Now we'll have some questions. Please keep it really short. I have now reverted to my German roots. I think the first hand was the one at the back, please. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ana Filomena Amaral. I come from Portugal. I'm a writer too. And the question, a bit provocative, I have for you is, do you think that African tales or stories should be only told by African authors? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to take that or do we want to take one more? I think the other hand came up here quite quickly, over there. I think it was it the person in black? Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I could be, discriminating right now.
Hi, my name is Mutia Badruddin, and I don't have a question so much as a reflection for everybody, really. Because while I understand the gatekeeping of who gets to tell what stories, I think that one thing we don't think of, or one thing we fail to realize, is that in deciding who the insiders are, there's so many other voices that are not heard. Like Delma was talking about it a bit, about how there are other 347 tribes in Nigeria that get lost under the Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. I am a visibly Muslim, Black Nigerian woman. I am Yoruba, which is a dominant tribe, but my stories, our stories don't get told, even in African literatures. I hardly ever recognize a character whose experiences speak anything to me, mostly because when a Black woman is written, she's almost never Muslim. When a Muslim woman is written, she's almost never Black. When she's Muslim and Black, she's downtrodden, subjugated, uneducated. We all know the stereotypes.
We do.
The point is, so when I'm in a Muslim circle, those are not my stories, not totally. When I'm in the African circles, those are not my stories, not totally. So even though I am from the majority group in whatever setting, and I am, an insider, quote and unquote, our stories still don't get told.
Okay.
So while we are gatekeeping the insiders, we should ask ourselves what stories, even amongst ourselves, are considered insider enough? Who is African enough to speak to the African experience?
So while we're educating the outsiders, we should reassess ourselves.
Thank you.
As insiders. Thank you very much. That's a very good one. Thank you. I think we'll take one more question. Sorry. That hand came up. The hand next to, that hand came up and then that one. But we'll take that one and then we have the answers and then we'll try and come back if we have more time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So by the way, Tim, I think you've written a very, very beautiful book. I've read the book, and so the first question is about like which of the characters that you talked about made the most impression, the most profound impression on you. And two is a question around access. Like, I thought, the rarefied access you had to all the folks you spoke about in the book perhaps would have been difficult if you were a Nigerian journalist. Just that up close and personal fly on the wall encounter. Like, so how much of the privilege of being a Reuters journalist did materialize, and how much consciousness did you have, in writing that book as well? Thanks.
All right, thank you. So
Our brother asked the white man the question. Can you believe that?
our own brother asked the white man the question. So, Tim, you will take that question, and then any of you two can take that other question, and then we go back again to the poll. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, so
No spoilers.
Just quickly on the issue of Muslim women being underrepresented. Two of my characters in my book are Yoruba Muslim women.
Yep.
And they're not downtrodden. I mean, they're not, they're not like top of the chain either.
They're
but
badass.
But they've got agency in a big way.
Chingona.
So I hope that makes it more appealing.
One is a son. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, Gary. So just to start with did I have better access than a Nigerian might have done? I genuinely believe, because now this is now flipping the insider-outsider thing, and it's worth exploring. I genuinely believe that a Nigerian could have done this book. And my whole worry, my doubt demon was, am I really the right person to write it? Why shouldn't it be a Nigerian doing this? And I think if I tried to do a Nigerian fiction novel set in Lagos, in a Nigerian family, I would be treading on very well-worn territory, and I'd be in danger of really, not having anything to add that Nigerian fiction writers haven't already done so beautifully. Non-fiction, it felt like there was, I'm not going to say gap in the market, because that sounds like a horribly capitalist phrase, and it implies that I might make some money out of the book, which seems doubtful. But anyway, so it seemed like there was room for it, and I wrestled with the idea if I'm the right person to do it. And I did think, do I have an advantage? Because in a way, because it's about spirituality, for instance, right? One morning I'm in a Pentecostal church, the afternoon I'm going to see the Babalawo, right?
And he almost got an exorcism. Sorry for spoiling.
Oh yes, that's yeah. So if I'd been Nigerian, maybe my auntie would have been with me in the Pentecostal church, and then she would have afterwards said, "Oh, what are you doing going to the Babalawo?" So it may have been more difficult. I don't know. But it made it. But in other ways, it made it more uncomfortable, because I did the exorcism was. I might as well say this now quickly. Have we got time? So anyway.
Go ahead, go for it.
Okay, so one of my characters is a character who is an oil executive who gambles her entire fortune on a prophecy from T.B. Joshua, and she mortgages both her houses and all her savings, and then it all goes wrong, and she loses everything. And I'm not going to tell you what happens next, because there's a redemption story. Anyway. I told her, my wife had PTSD from the things we'd experienced in the war in Ivory Coast, and it was really bad. I mean, it was like, we were looking for all kinds of help, and I told her about this, and her idea, naturally, according to her worldview, was that this is spiritual attack, that you need to go to my pastor, and he'll, and so I went to it, and then, this pastor, I went to the exorcism room with it. And I got in there and I thought, this is great. It was a red rag to a bull for a journalist, right? I was like, yes, I'm going to really be able to write about this. And I got in there and I'd seen this stuff before, but it was, because I was now a participant, it started to become really quite scary. It was real, yeah. There were people rolling around. There was the pastor shouting, in Jesus' name, I cast you out, you wicked spirit. And I started to realize, this is going to be me now. And I was like, okay. Right, and then he came up to me.
Don't tell us how it ended.
And the camera rolled up. Yeah, okay, so I won't tell you.
Yeah, I need you.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway,
don't give it all away.
So the point is actually that. So I then, of course, thought, well, I can't use this until I try to understand what it's really about. So I interviewed her afterward, and I apologized for well, I'm not going to say what I apologized for, because that ruined the story. Anyway, I said to her, look, just explain to me, how does this work? She said, look, you've got a family curse, right? It goes down the generations. Your forefathers worshipped some spirit or other, and now they're making demands on you, and it's because you're in a high position, that's when they want to bring you down. And I thought, okay, this is intriguing, but I tried to try and understand it, because there's always, when anything supernatural or spiritual, there's always another way of looking at it. And then the penny dropped, and I figured out she's talking about intergenerational trauma, that things that were bad that happened in your family many generations ago will keep coming down the generations unless you deal with them, unless you face up to them.
And I'm going to now stop you there, not just for time, but because we have to sell these books as creative. You are doing the journalism thing where we are okay to be poor as journalists, but not as authors. It's a lap dance, team. You need to leave a bit of mystery.
Yes. Sorry.
Because you're over here now flinging the G-string all over. You want to say something else? I got you good, didn't I? Who wants to take the other question that Anna had? I think it was Anna. Said, should non-Africans be telling African stories?
Yes, non-Africans can tell African stories. Again, I go back to doing it with respect to the culture, to the history, to the knowledge. So being knowledgeable in what's being done by working with the right people to do the research and what's required. But honestly, I sincerely believe that non-Africans can absolutely tell African stories.
Okay. I think that African stories should predominantly be told by Africans. However,
Tim is nodding here.
You cannot put you cannot limit people's creativity and imagination. That's human nature. With that said, my creativity and imagination is regularly limited. I was developing a book called The Third Worlding of Great Britain, which is actually foretelling a lot of what we're seeing in Britain right now about Britain's decline and everything else. And it was just like, no way. So I had to go and write a book about hip-hop instead, which I'm happy to write, but it just speaks to, once again, about who gets access to tell whose story and what. So yes, non-Africans should tell African stories, but at the same time, this tale of the African must be told predominantly by the African and unapologetically so.
Tim, we agree.
I cannot wait to read your book about hip hop. But actually, is this not changing now a bit? Is there not a shift where there's a kind of no, we need the opposite now. We need to have these stories told by the right people, because I feel that there is.
Yeah, that's the Black Writers Guild is working in Britain. The Black Writers Guild is working on that with the publishing industry over there, vastly and significantly. Please, I'll let you speak.
Oh no.
No, please go ahead, please.
No, so I was just saying that in filmmaking, where I currently spend most of my energies, much as I used to write in my former life, you find that these partnerships work really well. So when I speak from the point of view of a filmmaker. So if I'm making a film in Lagos, and I want to bring a DP from the US, and I want to find a writer in the UK to write it, it doesn't necessarily mean that by the time that film is done, it's not going to be authentically African and told by myself. And so going forward, especially for where my industry is going, we actually want these stories to be a collaborative effort. And so when I speak, that's what I mean. However, what I do absolutely agree with is that predominantly, underline predominantly in caps, put it on fire. Predominantly, it should be told by us.
Okay, and speaking of fire, my ass is on fire from the organizers.
Can I say
so I'm really sorry. Yes, you can.
Yep.
But I want to just apologize to the audience. I am so sorry. Say we're out of time. I know we all came here on time, but apparently we're out of time. Nels, go on and have the last word.
There's a great British, actually there's a great American TV show, American-made TV show called The Crown, which is actually about the British royal family. If you want to see how protective people can be of their stories, go and look at how the British media treats how the royal family is portrayed in The Crown, to the point where they forced Netflix to put a disclaimer in front of it that this is actually not real story, so this is just fictionalized garbage whatsoever to destroy their own story. Now, if Africans had the power to tell Europeans to put disclaimers in front of their actual stories about Africa or so, who knows where it would be.
And on that note, we want to thank you all for your patience. Please grab every one of these people and have your conversations with them. Please collaborate with them. Please buy their books. We deliberately did not give you spoilers so you could have something to read.
Thank you for choosing us over a siesta as well.
Thank you all, wonderful people of Ake. We love you. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you so
Kim.
much.
Thank you, Nels. Thank you, Delmois.
A round of applause again for an insightful and engaging conversation.